I went and saw The Aviator with 45 other people, all who like different films and were in need of a good movie. Any movie to relax with after a stressful day.
Can you relax with this film?
Is that a good choice?
During the film, nearly 20 of the people in my group went out halfway through and they never came back. 7 people admitted to falling asleep.
It's a long film.
Yeah.
Only 2 people said they liked it.
Out of 45?
Out of 45.
That is a 2% success rate.
That's a brutal.
I personally lost the will to live. That is a 1-star review from IMDb. Welcome to Spoilers Intended, a podcast about series and films. I'm Ryan, joined as always by Andrew.
Hello.
And Steven.
Greetings and salutations.
In this episode, we're reviewing Martin Scorsese's Oscar-winning 2004 epic aerial biopic of Howard Hughes. That's right, we're talking The Aviator. But first, before we get into all that, we're talking about something very important. And that is a top 5 scenes.
No, stop. Hold on. We're not talking about that yet. We're talking about the very important fact of how do you go to a movie theater with 45 other people?
Listen, he had at least 45 friends in a very large car.
I want to know the logistics of this operation.
I don't believe him at all. No one has 45 friends. I'm sorry.
Think about your friend group and understand that it's not 45 people. Let's start there. But think about your friend group, right? And the logistics of being able to get like 5 people together to go see a movie.
See one movie, right?
See one film, much less to get 45 people together on board to go see a movie. This dude must have paid all of them to come and said, you can walk out if you want. I don't know. Just show up, please.
I think the real takeaway here, though, is that he could have a killer D&D game.
Yeah, like they all show up at on time at the same place.
Yeah,
you never get that.
I know.
Also, when you did like a round of combat, it only take like 3 weeks for all 45 people to take their turn. It comes back to him and he's like, what? I forgot we were playing.
Taking a nap. All right, anyways, back to our top.
Yeah, so before we get into our discussion about The Aviator, we're going to go around and we're going to rank our top 5 scenes involving a plane or an aerial vehicle. And we're going to start with number 5, work our way up to number 1. We don't know.
Vehicle. We opened this up a little.
Well, I mean, okay, so it can't be in space.
No, that's not fair.
That doesn't count.
It's not fair.
And it can't use magic.
No magic, no space.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, you can't use magic.
In the theme of Howard Hughes and The Aviator, it's got to be some kind of aerial vehicle.
But it doesn't have to have a propeller.
No.
It probably will, but it doesn't have to.
Just in the air.
Yep.
And not a bird.
And we didn't discuss this, so there may be some overlap.
If there is, there is. Okay,
yep.
so we're going to start with number 5, work our way up, and we're going to start with Andrew. Give us your number 5.
Okay, so I picked, and this is not it is a combat scene, but not plane combat.
Okay.
This is the cargo fight, or cargo plane fight at the end of Living Daylights with Timothy Dalton.
That's a good scene.
This is where he is kind of like escaped with the a bunch of cocaine, and he's basically on this cargo plane, and
it was the 80s. I mean,
eventually, the back of the cargo plane opens up, and him and the henchmen are kind of wrestling around on this net that has all the cocaine in it, disguised as first aid bags.
Yeah, if you've seen Uncharted.
But yeah, basically, if you've seen Uncharted, this is where they got that from.
Yes.
So
cocaine and all.
Yeah. And the Bond girl is basically flying the cargo plane while this is happening, and she doesn't know how to fly a cargo plane, so she's kind of going back and forth. And
which Bond girl is it? Does she have like a thick accent?
Yes.
That one?
Okay.
Put
She's
him on
Russian.
The spot.
Yeah, I've been like, Mr. Bond, and she's like vaguely remembers some kind of.
But yeah, so it ends where these Timothy Dalton and the henchmen are basically just hanging outside of this cargo plane and just throwing punches. Eventually, grabs on the boot and takes the knife and throws the guy off and into the oblivion. It's a great scene.
Cool.
I love it.
Right.
Love it. Steven, what's your number 5?
All right, I showed Andrew this scene earlier because I needed somebody else who had actually seen it. 1991's Flight of the Intruder.
Mm-hmm.
So
my.
they make a raid on, I'm pretty sure it's Hanoi, but it's called Sam City. So it's supposed to have like the highest density of anti-air. So they go in at 200 feet. So the A6 Intruder is kind of like a side-by-side fighter bomber style plane. So you're sitting
It is
next
a very
to this person.
thick plane.
It's a wide plane. And they're literally, there are some actual aerial shots woven in there, but this bit is definitely done with models where they have it flying basically down Main Street,
Yeah.
like between the buildings.
Yeah.
While like flak's going off all around them and they're making bombing runs. I have to go back. They mess up one of the runs, and his bombardier / co-pilot looks at him and is like, well, they never expect us to go back again. And they turn back around and do it again. It's like Willem Dafoe. It's very
It's very 90s.
Very 80s and 90s, yeah. And of course, once something explodes, everything explodes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
All right, Ryan.
My number 5 is the 1997 Harrison Ford film, Air Force One. The scene is at the end when a very heavily Russian accented Gary Oldman is having his final fight with Harrison Ford. They're rolling around in the back of this cargo, area, like the doors open, the wind's going, and he slips a parachute on, and he's planning to escape, and they're fighting, and Harrison Ford yanks the parachute and holds him and says, "Get off my plane," and then lets him go. And I was in the theater in 1997, saw that, clapped.
I mean,
loved it.
It
I was
is.
like,
It is a truly
"Get off my plane."
That was the first version of the 300 well kick, where he's like, "This is Sparta. This
Yes.
is America."
America.
I'm the president.
I'm the president.
All right, so number 4 is real easy for me then.
Jump
It's
in. Go ahead.
Air Force One. Harrison
Nice.
Ford.
Nice.
I told you, I was almost positive we're going to have overlaps. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Okay, so my 4 is the Battle of Britain, 1969 film. It's basically the Battle over London, the finale of the film, where there is no dialogue, there is no sound effects or anything, just classical score over these Spitfires and Messerschmitt BF-109s just going at it, dogfighting. Incredible aerial footage for the time. For the production for the film, they had 100, 1940, World War II, 1940s planes. And it was like one of the 30th or 35th largest Air Force in the world at the time.
This actually fits in really well with the Aviator when he was filming. Like he makes these comments. It's the same kind of idea, basically.
Yeah.
And so today I was kind of like going through and I was like just making sure that I had the right thought, because I've seen Battle of Britain a couple times, but it's been a while. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go just watch a couple of the scenes just to make sure that I was on par. And then I just found out that YouTube had the whole film, so I just rewatched the whole film for free.
Why not?
Yeah.
Nice.
Ryan?
My number 4, I mean, really 70% of this movie could be on this list. It is from the 1980 Zucker Brothers comedy Airplane.
Oh, yeah.
I thought about putting Airplane all over this list so hard.
My
it was on a short
struggle
list.
was just not making a top 5 moments from the movie Airplane list when I got to this. So if I had to pick one scene, which I don't want to, I would say it's when Leslie Nielsen and I can't think of the actress's name.
Either way,
Elaine, the stewardess,
Yeah.
is in the cockpit, and the captain's flying, and they're explaining what's happening. Like, anyone that ate the fish is having an issue. And he looks down, and he's got this fish that has been, I'm talking, he ate the face off this fish. Like, it is bones, it is skeleton. And they start describing, it starts with, like a sweat.
symptoms,
He starts sweating, and it then hives, and he's itching. And every symptom, the guy's like reacting, and like, just a really well acted scene, especially for comedy, just the way that he sold all that stuff.
Airplane's just a
and just
fantastic film.
the landing at the end with him sweating, where they just have the hose pouring water over him. It's just so good.
That's definitely one of my favorite, just like meme gifs that I just kind of throw into chats every once in a while.
Yeah. So we're on 3, right?
We're
Number
on
3.
All
Yeah.
right, well, I'm gonna pick this up because it's a scene that also takes place in a cockpit, and it actually has a little bit of comedy, but it's just a sprinkle of comedy amongst very serious. This is Memphis Belle.
Oh.
And they're going through a big run of flak. This is World War II bombers, B-17s. And they get hit by flak. And the pilot and the co-pilot are both just covered in blood.
Yeah.
And the co-pilot turns to the pilot and says, you've been hit. And he's like, no, you've been hit. He's like, no, you don't understand. You're in shock. You've been shot. And like, no, you're in shock. You've been shot. And the top turret gunner or the radio, someone who else is in the space, steps forward and picks up a can of tomato soup off the dash, basically. That's been destroyed by the shrapnel. And it's like, no, it was just lunch. Like, it's a really serious movie, but like you just have this one bit of moment and all of it is just hilarious.
I mean, sometimes that's kind of like the best spots to put comedy because you need to release that tension.
Yeah, that little bit of seasoning.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Me? Okay, so I picked an anime this time.
Oh.
It is
Shocking
from
twist.
1985 to 1986, Area 88. And so we watched just a little top thing earlier today, and that was on there, and I was like, hey, I already know this. And so it is basically takes place in the Middle East, and it's kind of like a mercenary thing where you get hired on, and then to pay your way back out of like kind of like this indentured servitude, you have to get kills for the company essentially that they're working for.
Yeah.
And there is this massive air battle in the series that basically takes place where they start at range, like not within visible distance, and they do long range missiles at each other, and then it turns into a very close range dogfight.
Yeah,
that is like when I say beautifully animated F-14s and F-5s.
Beautiful. It's not beautiful. It's lovingly.
Yeah,
It's lovingly animated.
It is.
And now, is this a movie series?
It's an OVA.
Okay.
So OVA, so
yeah.
it's like 6 episodes.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely spectacular. It's kind of, I'm kind of sad that this didn't hit number 1 for me, but
Right.
there's a reason for that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of those 80s OVA anime stuff, they just animate stuff like, it's like the amount of time and animators it took to do some of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Ryan?
Okay. My number 3 is from the 1983 Twilight Zone movie.
Okay.
It is John Lithgow's scene. Oh, because so if you're not familiar with the Twilight Zone movie,
I know
it's like 4 or 5 different. It's kind of like the Twilight Zone episodes, and it's a new take on the William Shatner original Twilight Zone episode of "There's Something on the Wing."
Mm-hmm.
I like the William Shatner one. Don't get me wrong. I like the classic Twilight Zones, but like the way John Lithgow plays this character in the movie, the 83 movie with like there's something on the wing and there's this gremlin just destroying the plane and no one sees it but him and he's losing his mind. Fantastic.
So
one of my favorite like horror movie kind of type scenes of like just the tension he adds to it is just great.
That's one of my favorite Looney Tunes gags from the original run, and it is just hilarious watching those.
Well, it's such a class. I mean, it's made it through so many different media at this point. It's just such a classic.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Steven, what's your number 2?
My number 2. Okay, so this is just, I just wrote Top Gun Maverick, duh. Just pick a scene. I think probably for me, the personal favorite just moment in that is when they first start training and he does the, good morning, aviators. This is your captain speaking. This is what we'll be, blah, blah, blah. The fight begins now and just shoots between them.
Yep.
And it's just such a moment because, I mean, there's just so much danger in that kind of maneuver just in general.
Well, yeah. I mean, and Top Gun Maverick is kind of the golden standard at this point.
And I only put it at number 2. There are reasons for this, but basically everything in that movie is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
We've already done a review on it. You can go back and listen to that. Just gushed over it back in season 1. But.
Yep. So my number 2 is another anime. It is The Wind Rises, and it is essentially the climax of the film. Very emotional. Yeah. I know Steven has not seen The Wind Rises, so I'm not going to give anything away.
I haven't seen it either.
Cool. We're going to have to review that sometime.
Sitting at home in a steelbook ready to be watched.
I've got the Miyazaki Blu-ray collection. Just haven't made it that far yet.
So this scene, just as a general thing, is basically the main character. He is an engineer, and this is basically the moment to where they are test flying the Mitsubishi A5M, which is basically a Japanese Zero.
The Zero.
Zero. And this is the first time that they've all seen it fly. They're testing the speed of it and everything. And Miyazaki just does a absolutely wonderful job at realizing this plane in the glory that it is of just a engineering marvel for the time, not the fact that it was a glorified, war plane.
Right.
And there's some other stuff that happens that really adds to the emotion of the scene. And if you've never seen Wind Rises and you like aviation, go see that film.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely honorable mention Porco Rosso, the final duel.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
that was on my short list as well.
Yeah, that was a tough one to cut, but
I'm actually surprised you did.
there's so many. The problem is this was such a broad topic. I could have put so many things in here.
I had a hard time getting it to 5. I was like, oh man.
Ryan,
My number 2 is from the 2015 Mission Impossible film Rogue Nation. This is when Tom Cruise basically hangs onto the outside of a I can't remember the exact model
some kind
plane.
of cargo plane.
It's a cargo plane. I can't
cargo
remember the
plane.
exact one. I looked it up earlier, but yeah.
D5 or something.
And that was one of the first scenes where I was like, oh, Tom Cruise has lost his mind. This is an actual stunt, and this man is hanging off the outside of a plane.
They did
for the whole scene.
They did like 6 or 7 takes of it.
Oh yeah,
It's
it's insane. When you watch the making of that scene, you're like, man. But even in the movie, it works so good because he's trying to get into this plane.
Yep.
And he's like, open the doors, Benji. And then Benji's like, what? And he's like, how are you in the plane? He's like, not in the plane, on the plane. Open the doors. And he's like trying to hack into this Russian plane. And like, yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's definitely, that was also on my short list.
Yeah, it was great. All right. So, Steven, you want to do your number 1?
My number 1. Okay, so I'm reaching way back. Again, showing off my old man. 1959's North by Northwest.
Ooh, good one.
Yep.
That was
So,
close to being on my list.
This is a classic for me. This is Alfred Hitchcock, Cary Grant, and he is just out in the middle of nowhere. I think this is what really makes it stand out to me is just the terror that is a plane when there's no cover. And so he's out in the middle of nowhere trying to wait for like a bus stop. And this crop duster flies by and like does these low passes over him.
Yeah.
And they did a really good job of merging for the time.
Yeah.
It's dated now, but of merging on set scenes of Grant because they were not going to fly a plane over Cary Grant.
Right.
So they fly this plane very, very low and then have him like diving into like piles of gravel that are obviously on a sound stage.
Yeah.
And then have the film clipped over it.
And the way they did it back in the day was they basically just projected the film behind them on a screen because they didn't have green screen at the time. They didn't have, so like, I'm with you. Like for the time, they made it really great. I'm sure people ran out of the theater screaming.
Yeah, but like, and it's like, it's, making strafing runs and he finally finds like a cornfield to hide in and then it's a crop duster. So they just dust the field to drive him out because he can't breathe. And like, he finally like runs out into the road and like flags down a tanker truck that almost runs him over in stopping. And the plane is trying to make another pass, and it hits the tanker truck, and the whole thing explodes.
Yeah,
like it's just a nuts scene, just for the time and what they're doing. It's just incredible.
Yeah. Andrew, what's your number 1?
Okay, so I went with the most recent masterpiece of aviation filming, Top Gun Maverick.
There it is.
And but I picked specifically the F-14 versus the Su-57 fight at the end of the film.
Right.
And it is the most amount of excitement just because it's very fan servicey and it's a lot of fun. But everything that is happening in the film and in the fight have kind of like met up to this moment, very emotional climax, but then also everything that is happening feels earned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And plus the footage is just absolutely
I was going to say,
phenomenal.
and the footage is fantastic.
Yeah.
So it just is
it's
icing on the cake.
It's kind of like just the culmination of every like aerial dogfight that you want out of a film. It's emotional. It has story impact. It is beautifully shot, and it is exciting.
I almost just singled out the Dark Star scene at the start of the movie where it blasts over the Admiral and they like lift the roof off. And that actually happened. They could only do one take because they destroyed the set.
Oh, no. Hope we got it in one.
Yeah. Ryan?
All right. When we expanded this category from planes to aerial vehicles, one scene jumped to mind, and that is from the 1991 Jackie Chan film.
Oh.
Police Story 3 Super Cop. It is the final stunt.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
I'm going to let you finish.
Uh-huh.
Andrew, I am so disappointed in you.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
We both are. As your parents, we are very disappointed. As I was saying, Super Cop, the final stunt scene, Jackie Chan
Just
hanging from a
insane.
helicopter. The insanity
all the way
of-
through Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah, the way it's shot, how
From
many
a
takes they had to
rope ladder
do.
down below it. Like,
Yeah.
God,
And the story that led to it also is fantastic. Where like Michelle Yeoh that was her return to acting. She had retired for like 2 or 3 years before that.
Yeah.
She came back and she was just so excited to be like billed along with Jackie Chan as like a female lead instead of just like a supporting character. And she was doing all of her stunts and she did the motorcycle jump onto the train.
Yep.
And Jackie was like, I can't let you one up me in this movie. And so he was like scrambling. He's like, I'll hang from a helicopter. And they were like, okay, hold on. And when Jackie Chan's, stunt people were like, I don't know, bud, that's a bit much. But yeah, that whole scene, I remember the first time I ever saw that movie, I was like,
I mean, it's staggering just
It's
watching
insane.
him just like literally just fly through and like hit things.
yeah.
yeah.
And like know that he could have fallen off that ladder very easily.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I love you referencing the stunt guy because there's a clip of Matt Damon talking about having a conversation with Tom Cruise
Yeah.
about the hanging on the outside of the plane scene.
Yeah.
And he's like, so Tom Cruise and I are having dinner. And I was like, so how did you do this scene? He's like, well, I told my stunt guy what I wanted to do. And the safety guy said, well, there's no way we could do that. And Matt's like, well, so what did you do? He's like, well, I got another stunt guy.
Speaking of swapping employees and firing people sometimes when it's not really necessary, when they can't give you what you want, let's transition over to talking about The Aviator.
Yeah, that's a good segue.
Smooth.
Kind of. Okay, so here's some quick details about The Aviator, right? It's released in 2004, directed by Martin Scorsese, obviously Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, mostly known, maybe unfairly for a lot of his, mob-related movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was written by John Logan, who also wrote Gladiator, The Last Samurai, and 2 007 movies with Skyfall and Spectre.
Not a bad,
Yeah.
not a bad list there,
That is a good list of films.
Yeah, and he had a pretty good list. That was just the ones that jumped out to me of like, I didn't know he wrote that. So
Yeah.
decent writer. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Cate Blanchett, Kate Beckinsale, John C. Reilly, Alec Baldwin, Alan Alda. All of them do great. There's a ton of cameos. There's so
a
many
lot
people
of
in this
cameos.
movie. It's ridiculous. It was composed by Howard Shore, the
Yep.
same guy that did Silence of the Lambs 7 and The Lord of the Rings.
I was
I was about to say,
Say,
are we missing Lord of the Rings?
I was building up to Lord of the Rings. It was that was the big one. Like I wouldn't start with that and then go. And also, I don't know, Silence of the Lambs, I guess, whatever. It made a box office of 213.7 million worldwide, with 102 of that being like domestic. And it won several Oscars. Most notable ones: Best Actress, Cate Blanchett. Cinematography, editing, art direction, and costume design. So it swept a lot of the Oscars that year. It didn't get Best Director, Best actor, but
Best actor
it
for
got
Leo. Poor
a
Leo.
lot of poor Leo. A lot of good
He
stuff.
has one now, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
He finally got one.
Yeah.
All right. So the plot summary for The Aviator, if you haven't seen it, is billionaire and aviation tycoon Howard Hughes, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, is a successful public figure, a director of big budget Hollywood films such as Hell's Angels, which that whole part of this movie is just hilarious to watch, like the whole back and forth. He's a passionate lover of Hollywood leading ladies Katharine Hepburn and Ava Gardner, played by Cate Blanchett and then Kate Beckinsale. And he's an aviation pioneer who helps build TWA into a major airline. But in private, Hughes remains tormented, suffering from paralyzing phobias and depression. The higher he rises, the farther he has to fall.
Yeah, and if you know anything about Howard Hughes' life, then you know where this is going.
So I didn't know anything about Howard Hughes' life going into this, but you guys definitely did. So what was your overall thoughts on The Aviator?
I'll let Steven go first because he has more aviation knowledge than I do.
What's funny is I didn't really jump up and down about the aviation. I loved scenes of Leo as Howard iterating through. No, this isn't good enough. Do
doing
this
the
again.
engineering
Do this
stuff.
different. And also the rapid fire calculations of, well, what's the weight? What ceiling are you doing? Like you can push it to 25,000. Well, we can get 3,000 miles range out of that. How much weight are you carrying? How much fuel weight are we carrying? And it felt very real, and it really made him, Howard Hughes seem as that obsessive genius that he definitely was.
Yeah.
I have a major complaint, and it didn't need to be 2 hours and 50 minutes long.
It was a long film.
It is, a really long film, and like I can watch some long films.
He'd seen Braveheart one way through, no breaks.
No break.
Or you do like the Lord of the Rings extended edition marathon.
All 3 movies.
Champion
No
hour.
breaks.
No bathroom breaks, and you play the Hobbit naming drinking game where every time the name is said, you have to drink. And you're Sam.
God, be a room of
ruined.
dead people.
Ruined. Sam, Frodo. Sam. Oh, no. Anyways. But yeah, I mean, it felt longer than that length, that runtime.
Yeah.
Because it was very, again, from my perspective, as having a lot of knowledge of what was going to happen, it felt like a documentary. And it had kind of almost too dry a feel at times. And I also looked it up because I was curious. 110 million budget.
Mm.
So based on the general math, it probably lost money or barely broke even.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. But of course, Oscar bait, generally speaking, is not commercial success. So there's always the trade-off. And I do think Leo did a really phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Andrew, what do you think?
Okay, so this is the second time I've seen the film, and I've liked it both times. I have a decent amount of knowledge of Howard Hughes.
Yeah.
And the film takes some liberties, and it condenses a lot of the timeline down. But then they also make the timeline vague enough to where you don't really know how long some of these stretches go.
Yeah, they didn't give you a good passage of time.
Yeah.
Feel.
The film covers most of kind of his worst aspects as a person. They didn't touch on any of the domestic abuse stuff that he had with Ava Gardner, and then also some of his solicitation stuff with a lot of other younger females from Hollywood.
They touched on
a little bit,
a bit, yeah,
a little bit. But it's kind of one of those things where, and they also didn't mention that he was actually married twice before him and Kate Hepburn got together. But overall, I mean, like the film, it is fascinating, especially at the beginning, to watch him kind of like produce Hell's Angels, which was kind of like the beginning of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, like, I still really like it. Leonardo DiCaprio is one of my favorite actors.
Sure.
It's really hard for me to watch a film with him in it and not enjoy it.
Yeah.
So, but I do agree with Steven. It is very long. And I love like Return of the King. And I like long films.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This was a very long film, and it felt long.
It does feel long. I would say overall, I liked it. I liked it pretty good. I thought it was extremely well acted. Like, I think obviously Leo, Cate, Blanchett, like every major actor in the movie does a really good job.
Well, I think even the supporting cast, seeing Alan Alda in there as the senator was a real treat. I didn't know he was in the film, so he just hits. I'm like, oh, that's Alan Alda. I'm a huge MASH fan.
Even like Adam Scott as just kind of his Hollywood guy is really fun. Press
manager or something like that?
His title did not fit what all he did for Howard Hughes.
Yeah,
that was what kept throwing me. It was his press agent. And I was like, okay. But then you're making this guy do all sorts of stuff. But
But I mean, that's also kind of his.
Right.
I mean, you see it right from the start of the movie where he's just like, whoa, you're hired. Well, you do this, do that, do this. It's like, and the dude's like, well, is that in the job description? Well,
it's like, oh, cool. I just hired you for half the price of what I was going to pay someone else to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, coming less from a perspective of having any knowledge of Howard Hughes and more of a knowledge of Martin Scorsese's work, I would say it's definitely not my favorite Scorsese movie.
I think it's one of his weaker films.
Yeah, it's definitely weaker. Like you said, both of you guys, the runtime is a bit much. I feel like it could have been tightened up in a lot of places.
Yeah.
There were some choices made with the color grading and some of the special effects that, like, I don't even think probably worked great at the time. They were kind of grading. There was definitely a lot to pick out with this movie, but I think if you have any kind of interest in aviation or just want to see a very interesting biopic style look at a very eccentric person, this is good. Also, though, I do think it does a good job of like really delving into, despite the fact that it does a lot of time jumping and remixing of like what his life actually was, because I find myself doing that with a lot of movies like this that's like based on a story or based on like, I'll stop and I'll be like, there's no way that happened. And then I'll Google it and I'll be like, oh, it did, but it happened 10 years later.
Exactly.
And then they remixed it. Because again, it has to be, the typical structure of a movie. I think like you're saying, like they glossed over a lot of the negative aspects of his life, probably so you'd still root for him as a character in a movie.
Because you want to like the guy because you know that he has essentially like crippling OCD.
Right. Yeah.
And phobias that absolutely ruled his life, especially later on after basically 1945-ish.
Yeah.
And it's definitely one of those things where like if you had all of that the whole time, it would have felt. It's very hard for me to watch because like I know what's coming, and you're just like, this is one. Leo did a fantastic job at depicting that kind of illness.
Oh yeah, no, his on screen's just ridiculous.
Yeah, you were gonna say something.
I actually thought it was really weird because we have a main character, and for most of the film, he's not necessarily someone that, as a modern viewer, you're going to want to root for until towards the end, and then suddenly he like, oh, you totally redeemed yourself, kind of thing, and it was kind of bizarre because, I mean, Howard Hughes is definitely a kind of a tragic and also a somewhat almost villainous figure in actual history.
I mean, he's a rich millionaire that just did whatever he wanted to do.
Yeah, and also had his own tortured demons, but also did not some great things. And even for the time, it was at least sort of accepted. He was rich enough that it was accepted, but it was still scandalous, right? So.
I think the other thing too, like with the time jumping, that is again very different from like a movie like Goodfellas or something where they put the literal date up to kind of give you like a map of like how the timeline of what's happening. I think that works in its favor of not doing it in this movie because it makes you the viewer kind of off balance and kind of disoriented sometimes because you're like, wait, how much time has passed between this and this? And I think that gets you a little closer to being in the headspace of Howard Hughes a little bit. Not all the way, obviously, but like it at first bugged me because, again, I wanted to know, like, when is this? Is this like a year later? Is this 10 years later?
Yeah.
When is this? But I think it works for its benefit with the exception of being too long, just like to keep you kind of guessing at what's happening to kind of put you closer to that. So that part worked for me. All right, so each of us have rated this movie in secret. We don't know each other's scores across 5 different categories: spectacle, performance, score, plot, and entertainment. Then, using dark, forbidden spreadsheet sorcery, we take these scores and combine them into an overall score. And so, using that, our score for The Aviator is
a 7.
7.
So, there, like we said, it's one of Scorsese's probably weaker films.
Sure, yeah.
But there is definitely something here for someone, especially if you are interested in aviation, especially aviation history, because Howard Hughes was a integral part of just the history of aviation, period.
I mean, he is a leading figure in
well, and he broke
formation.
Multiple world records. Just like he was all over the place with what he had his hands in.
Well, and for me, for probably the person who's the least interested in aviation in this podcast, like, it was really exciting to see just how many moments he moved for, like how much he moved the needle in aviation just by being this eccentric
and being a guy that would be like, 15 million, let's go. Like, I'll that's my money. I'll do it.
Yeah. Or even just, you say, well, we should be looking at doing it this way. And everyone would say, well, no one does it this way. And it's like, well, that's what we should be looking at it. We should be pushing what is possible.
Yeah.
Which again was definitely his, actual persona, and also made him very difficult to be around in real life.
Well, and again, I don't know how simplified they made those conversations for the movie versus like in real life. Like, did he really just be like, no, let's just buy it? Like, was he that type of dude?
He was definitely like that kind of person.
Yeah.
Like, I enjoyed that aspect of the movie and the way Leo played it, of like his portrayal of just being that unhinged almost on some levels of just like, I want to do this thing. Well, the board of directors won't go for it. What's controlling stake in TWA? And he's kind of like just like starts getting into these deals out of nowhere, and you're like, wow.
Yep, and that is pretty much how he was.
Yeah. Well, and they did a good job too of balancing the kind of the manic side of it, but also the OCD side of it, where it sounds like a manic decision. Well, what's controlling stake? And then someone says, oh, and then he immediately does the math. Well, this is that amount of money. Well, let's get a loan. Let's do this. Put it up for that. Boom, boom. Like, he puts all the parts together, even though it sounds like a super, super turn on the dime. There's even a line in the movie where he's like, well, Howard, don't you want to think about that for 5 minutes? Kind of thing.
But he's already thought about it. He knows,
I was gonna say,
he sees all the iterations.
Like A Beautiful Mind or something. He's already like seen all the versions of what can happen with this. He's already thought it through.
And also there's an element of, once he's set his mind to it, that it has to happen, right? That's a big thing for his persona. Is it's part of the disorder, et cetera, and his own personal view of himself as, well, if I'm going to be this person, then I have to make it. I have to do it.
Have you heard what those crazy boys over at Spoilers Intended have been cooking up? It goes on week after week, month after month. They just keep putting out fresh content. Why, if you head over to that technological monstrosity that goes by the name SpoilersIntendedPodcast.com, you can listen to all their previous episodes. Not only that, but these new age titans of the podcasting industry have harnessed the power of the World Wide Web to bring faithful listeners all sorts of ways to interact with them. From pledging your support for their endeavors on Patreon to being a part of the rabble-rousing conversation on their Discord, or even following the fellas on social media or YouTube, this SpoilersIntendedPodcast.com show is the bee's knees. Check it out today. Okay, that means we are past the spoiler wall, so now we're going to get into everybody's individual scores. Let's start with Andrew.
Okay, for Spectacle?
Let's go with Spectacle. What did you give for Spectacle?
Okay, so I gave it a 7.
Okay.
I had I like selective color.
Okay.
I don't like selective color that is inconsistent. Okay, so it's one of those things where you could definitely kind of tell that at the beginning of the film, Scorsese really wanted to kind of push that, like, that this was like the Technicolor and this was like the faux color of, or before Technicolor, basically.
Yeah.
Of how they
Colorized.
colored films.
Almost like colorization.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they did that, and that's totally fine. But if you're going to do that, do it consistently. Where, like, it seemed like he was trying to go for any time that he did that selective or colorization of essentially black and white film is when it was pivotal moments for Howard Hughes. But then he doesn't do it towards the end of the film.
No, it to me is the way I read it was it only happens during the 20s. As soon as we get into the 30s where they have other stuff, they stopped doing that. Even though film was still black and white in the 30s, so it felt like a very strange choice to do. So, like you're saying, like only there.
So the thing with me is, if you're going to go with a really stylistic choice of doing that kind of like colorization, make the whole film to where whatever era that you're in, that is what the film looks like. So when they're in the 20s, it's black and white.
Yeah.
When it's in the 30s, or whenever they have more technology to add more stuff to the different film,
it's colorized and then it becomes Technicolor.
Exactly.
Well, so when did the movie end? What was like roughly
1947?
I don't think they had color film yet. So like it would have just been a black and white movie.
Yeah.
Or colorized. Yeah.
Or colorized the entire film. Yeah.
And that's the thing is, like, do it.
Just do the whole consistent.
Commit. Yeah. Instead of kind of like pussyfooting around it and being like, I don't know.
I would rather him not commit to that because I thought those sections were horrendous and they hurt my eyes. It was the colors he picked were like, I get that they were accurate for how you would colorize it. That was one of those things to where he should have looked at the test footage and gone like, all right, it's 2004. What can y'all do colorizing, this scene on the golf course? Oh no, that's bad. Let's not do that.
Well, I mean, so Pleasantville came out in 2009.
Something like that, yeah.
2006 or 2009 was one of those.
This is another
as
chance.
Steven looks it up.
Fact check this.
I think it was earlier than that. Keep going.
But like they did it great of where it fit that kind of thing. And even, I mean, we're going to go, this is different technology tiers at this point. But WandaVision did a fantastic job at creating.
Hold on. You said what year?
2006 or 2009?
1998.
I was going to say, I thought it was before 2000.
Oh, okay. Well, then never mind. He should have learned from that film.
No kidding. Yeah.
Example.
Yeah. He could have rented it the night before.
Yeah. So the other thing was, and I think this is where I say that it's definitely one of his weaker films, is his composition was okay for a lot of it. Like there was really only like a handful of like really auteur shots.
There were a few standout shots, and there's a lot of middle ground.
And the CGI unfortunately does not hold up.
No, but I think
the film,
you almost have to grade it on its time. No. Even for its time, though, I don't think it was
rough.
The Spruce Goose was rough.
Yeah,
very rough.
Yeah.
And a lot of the footage of like him, like aerial footage of him filming the aerial footage in the film was kind of
the key was really bad, like behind his head and his hands.
It felt it was. I don't know. It kind of had a lot of the Star Wars prequel feel to it.
Oh boy! All right, I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also gave it a 7.
Okay.
Selective coloring is a choice.
It is a choice,
and it's a choice you either commit to or you don't touch it.
Exactly.
And there is no in between. And this is maybe more of a plot thing. But if this movie was broken down into distinct eras, then it could be totally acceptable. You could have a black and white, you could have a recolorized and Technicolor and finish it out like that. And you don't have to say that we hit those years per se when the technology is there. You just do it, and that's your defining point between eras in his life. But we don't have that. We don't.
Well, and again, like other Scorsese movies where he does break movies into chunks, that would have made sense of like this whole section is one
it's very
way.
defined. Yeah. But yeah, even ignoring that choice,
Mhm.
the CGI was rough, especially given the way the scenes were set, where we're going from the interior of the Spruce Goose, which is obviously a built set, very realistic, et cetera,
to a very shiny
to
plane.
these exterior shots. I don't even know if I'd call it shiny. It just looked fake. And I am willing to bet that I didn't see this in theaters, but if you were in theaters and you saw that, you were just like, especially coming from, you know, movies that predate it, like The Rocketeer.
I mean, this is 2004, and so Lord of the Rings was already out.
But Lord of the Rings, you can get away with it because it's fantasy.
You absolutely
don't have as good an idea. Like I know what the Spruce Goose looks like.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, the Hercules.
It's the Hercules.
We're using the bad
sir.
name. We're using the bad name.
I mean, okay. Yeah.
Either way, it's whatever plane you want to
It
call
was not a good
It
plane.
was brutal CGI. The keyframing from interior cockpit shots of like the XF-11 and the Hughes Racer were also both very bad.
Yeah.
The Hughes Racer especially, they did a horrible job. This is one of these things that I'm always going to notice, right? So he gets in the plane with the hat on.
Yeah.
And he takes the hat off, puts it in his lap. Totally fair. The cockpit's open. Well, when they have the interior shots of him with it keyed out, with him in it, the cockpit's open. Well, they have multiple exterior shots where the cockpit is an enclosed cockpit because that's what you had to have. You really had to fly the plane around.
Yeah.
And then they cut back to him in it, and it's just open. It's like, what is going on? Like, this is not a big deal, but it's such a small thing that just it costs those disbelief dollars, right? Just instantly dings against it because as soon as I see it, it hits me, and it's ugh.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably my biggest. The CGI was, and I really like period pieces, and they did a really good job of selling me on late 20s, mid 30s, 40. Like they sold me on that, and I believed it until CGI showed up, and then I was like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I feel very similarly to you guys, but a little better. I gave it an 8.
Okay.
yeah.
I mean,
I
it's still a pretty looking film.
Yeah, so for me, I did like a lot of the cinematography. I like the scene where he and Katharine Hepburn, I want to call her Cate Blanchett, Katharine Hepburn,
Kate Hepburn
hook up for the first time, and his hand is like sliding along her back, and it cuts to his hand sliding along the outside of his plane.
Yeah.
You know, like so there were some definite intentional moments and shots that I appreciated. And again, like I think the way Scorsese and his cinematographer had a lot of the scenes framed with like when he starts to lose it and he's in like the screening room and like
That's definitely when it gets to the better kind of cinematography shots.
So I also thought, even though the CG was definitely weak, I tried to give it less of a knock against just because the time of 2004. Like it was a very ambitious thing what they were trying to do with some of that. I don't know what their budget was for CG
especially
specifically
with the aerial footage.
I mean, I will always hammer that just because like models exist, and you could have a model and then blend it in better with CGI, and then the whole thing doesn't rely on it, and it's gonna feel, if you're doing a decent job, it's gonna feel way better than what we got.
But counterpoint, I do think that the way some of the CG flight scenes were framed and the way that they executed it really drove home like I guess the spirit of flight and like the ingenuity of what's happening here.
They had a good romance of flight and the heady early days of aviation when anything was possible, and we're gonna do the craziest. We're gonna go 3,000 miles, and what? Never mind domestic. We're flying across the Atlantic. These kinds of things.
Well, probably my favorite part of all the aviation footage is whenever he's filming Hell's Angels and the landing gear of one of the other planes knocks off
the camera.
And then he takes out another camera that he has ready.
Well, just keep
filming.
shooting.
Especially because he just had the whole debate about, well, I only have 24 cameras and I need 26. And then one gets like, we found our rental. You know?
Yep.
But I think my biggest sticking point was the color grading. Like when it first hit, I literally backed out on HBO Max. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. Is something wrong with like the convergence on my screen?
My screen get messed up?
I was like, I played at something else. I was like, no, okay.
Am I having a stroke?
And I went back into it and I was like, all right, this was a choice. Okay. And then to me, at least, like you're saying with like Pleasantville from 98, like I feel like even the selective color stuff they were doing wasn't done as well as other movies had done it at that time. So to me, again, that whole thing made no sense to me of like, why did you even do part of the movie? I get like,
just don't touch it. If it's
it should have been like a scene. It could have been that opening scene could have been like that. And then they just transition out.
You start with that with like a different format and then it widens out. And the color changes as it widens out. And like, if you do that, hey, that was a cool choice. And when it happened and we're moving on and like, I'm in this now. You know, like you go from like Hell's Angels transitions into
to something else.
Shoot. Yeah.
So this is more of just a general hot take, but I think because it was the middle of the aughts, mid 2000s, I think that Scorsese and the people that were making the film felt that people didn't care. And it didn't matter to them one way or another.
But then why did Scorsese care?
But that's the thing though, is like he may have wanted to try it or whatever. But okay, so like if you had a film like that now and you have like audiences expect more production value.
Sure.
Yeah.
Instead of just these are well composed shots and the actors doing a really good job.
We're straight on.
Yeah.
And
but you know, so you look back at that and like we're nitpicking it. I understand like this is very much a nitpick at this point, but it's one of those things where I definitely feel that production companies at that time it was just churn out films,
get it done,
and
anything goes. Let's experiment with this, and if it really really works, and we have it in our back pocket for
exactly.
Now I will say they did have some good shots with really dramatic contrast lighting.
Yeah,
right? We had several,
a lot of really good lighting,
good
in this
hits,
movie.
Especially within the screening room.
Yeah,
because it lends itself to that.
And
right?
in the hangar where they're building
yes.
the Hercules with the sparks and everything flying around, and like really, I mean, like there are some very good shots in here.
And at the premiere for Hell's Angels, the way they use the light bulbs and all that to really drive
flash
home,
bulbs,
and how he's cutting the sound to basically kind of like force you into Hughes's mind.
There's one point where I think it's when him and Katharine Hepburn go to their first Hollywood party together, and she goes and she's talking to the mayor, and he like blinks like that right there, and they put a flash bulb sound effect in there to really just make you understand, like, you know, like I thought a lot of that was really well done. My biggest complaint was the color grading at the front, and that they just number one, it looks terrible. Number two, that they gave up on it. Like, what sense does it make that it just stops? It's just one scene picks up and is not there. I'm like, did they run out of money? Did they figure out this is going to take too long to do the whole
money
movie?
had to go to the Spruce Goose. It's fine.
Yeah, I was like, it was weird. Anyways, what did
last point. They also did a good. Speaking of the mindset, right? They did a good job in the Hercules hangar scene when he highlights on the janitor, right? And he focuses in. They did a really good job of dropping the background out behind him and almost spotlighting him in his vision.
That was really cool.
It's those kinds of things that really, because as soon as you see it, you go, oh, he's about to have some kind of paranoid fixation. Like, not just from Leo's acting, but that lighting choice really, really nailed it. So just one last, olive brand.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Leo's acting, who wants to go for performance?
I'll take it. I was talking.
Go for it.
Keep going.
Dump in there.
So I gave it an 8.
Okay.
Leo, obviously, I'm not going to say a whole lot about him because we've already been saying he did great.
He's a fantastic actor.
Right. I'm going to let y'all have that to chew on. For me, it was the supporting cast of actors that I really loved. I already said seeing Alan Alda was a real treat, and he plays, because he was always a comedian for so long, from my perspective, like MASH and all this, but he plays such a good heel. It's great. There was some really terrible movie, I can't remember, it was like a Ben Stiller movie, like heist thing, where he's like this really rich hedge fund investor who loses everyone's money. Yeah. He's such a good heel in that movie. And it's the same thing here, where he's just kind of this slimy Weasley, like he knows when he has power and when he doesn't. And stuff like that. Like Alec Baldwin as Trip. Juan Trip.
Yeah.
Which is just a hilarious
name. CEO of
a hilarious
Pan
name
Am,
for the CEO of Pan Am. Juan Trip. Anyways, he did a great job of being that kind of the mid 30s, mid 40s businessman.
Well,
you know,
and the
tycoon of
infallible
industry,
businessman.
tycoon of
Yeah.
industry,
Yeah.
who's going to bull his way through any problem,
Yep.
kind of thing. So all of these, I don't recall the actor's name, but his engineering assistant,
Obi or Odie.
Odie.
Yeah.
So when I saw him, I was like, I've seen that dude. And he's Gavin Belson on Silicon Valley on HBO.
That is a
doesn't
name that I have never heard.
Doesn't help me at all.
His name is Matt Ross. His actor's name is Matt Ross. But like, I have never seen him in anything except for Silicon Valley on HBO, which is very recent. And so I was like, looks like I've seen that dude. Like, what's he been in? And I kept I couldn't place it.
But all these people they pulled in, the guy playing the meteorologist,
Ian Holm.
Oh, Ian Holm. Yeah.
Perfect.
The Bilbo.
Shh. I knew that, but I couldn't remember his name. But still perfect, right? Perfect. I mean, it's a Bilbo role.
Yeah,
very much so. It is.
It's a total Bilbo role right here.
But I can say that you know exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
And just all these people that they found to bring in to support the big names who garnered the accolades. Rip Leo, just did such a great job, and that really, really drove it up for me. I think.
Yeah.
I gave it a 9.
Yep.
Right.
I was very impressed with everyone in this movie, just about top to bottom.
The accolades that the cast got for acting and stuff were absolutely deserved.
Well, so when Cate Blanchett first comes on screen, I was like, ooh, that's almost a cartoonish Katharine Hepburn accent. But then literally 2 lines later, I'm like, oh, no, wait, she's nailing this.
Oh, yeah.
She's really doing the Katharine Hepburn well,
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know what Howard Hughes sounded like, so I don't know if his, Leo's portrayal of that was
Leo
a little,
probably had more the energy of Howard Hughes and not really his intonation.
Did he have that twang? Like that was a
bit. I mean, he's from Texas,
right?
And he definitely chewed it a little bit, I would say. But it was still, it's close. Cate Blanchett was way more on.
She was a standout.
For me, the scene that clinched it with both of them is when he breaks the speed record, wrecks the plane, comes home and has the beet juice on his feet, and they're in the bathroom and she's tending to his wounds and they're having this heart to heart, and she's talking about, you're about to be famous, and he's like, oh, I can handle it, and she's like, you don't understand, when my brother committed suicide, there were photographers there, this is gonna get real. And then he's kind of breaks down and admits to her that I see things that aren't there sometimes, and that whole scene between the two of them and the way they played it and the space between lines and the way they looked at each other, that was man,
oh, it's fabulous.
two people they know what they're doing with the acting in this movie. Other than that, I agree with Steven. All the supporting cast was great. I think everybody, Alan Alda, who you don't get to see him as a villain enough, was great.
You really don't.
I thought Alec Baldwin, even though he basically just played Alec Baldwin in most movies, he did it, perfectly. John C. Reilly, I do think also was really good.
He was the great just finance guy of just you're paying me money. And I'm going to tell you not to do things, but I also don't have the backbone to tell you actually not to do things.
Just the facilitator throughout. Well, I love his scene when the phone call hits and his wife's like, don't answer it. And he goes through the whole deal with them and he hangs up. He's like, if I don't answer, he'll just call back.
Yeah.
Did I say pennies? And he's like,
Make it Sears.
Andrew, what'd you think?
I also gave it a 9.
Nice.
I thought Cate Blanchett was just absolutely fabulous. Even Kate Beckinsale as Ava Gardner was awesome.
A very believable Ava Gardner.
Yeah.
Looks the role.
She has the looks for it, and just fabulous all around for the whole supporting cast. I always love seeing Adam Scott in just random roles every once in a while. And he just has such a very greasy Hollywood kind of person.
Well, you put the mustache on him.
Oh,
and he fits the Clark Gable era so well. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but I mean, pretty much we've already said everything. But I mean, the cast was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't think that Leo should have won a acting role for this piece.
Okay.
Or I don't think he should have won an Oscar for this one.
I would have to see what else was up for Best Actor of the Year of 2004 to know for sure. Because I think he did.
Relative award.
Oh, no,
really good.
He did a fantastic job, but I think that I've seen him better in other films.
Oh, sure.
And the problem is, too, we keep harping on it, right? I mean, he's right next to Cate Blanchett, who is just killing it.
Right, yeah.
And you have all these other people who are doing just so well that either he had to just be phenomenal to really rise out above that, or he's just going to blend in as who he is.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, what happens here. It's not one of those movies where he gets to just completely dominate the screen over and over again.
And this is also one of his earlier roles coming off of Titanic.
Yeah.
To where he's still, you know, like this is one of his first films with Scorsese, and he's really, you know, finding his place in the acting world as well, because he's still pretty young at this point. You know, I mean, still did a great job.
Yeah.
Like,
But yeah, you can tell it's early Leo. He doesn't have the same level. Real quick shout out to Jude Law as Errol Flynn and being a dirtbag.
Totally random.
Really good, like random cameo. And I was like, oh, wow. He's in this? Cool.
Yep.
I mean, they found everybody.
Gwen
Scorsese.
Stefani's in there. Like, there's all these random people that just like fly in, and you're like, oh.
Yeah,
okay.
it was.
Scorsese's got the pull.
Yeah, I mean, it was a star-studded cast for a very small actual cast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to scores.
Of the score.
Steven, what did you give the score?
Gave it an 8.
Okay.
Yeah, I've already mentioned I love period pieces. So we get these jazzy bits in there, and it just sells me on. As soon as you have that first scene in the club, and you got the singer, which actually threw me a little bit that it was a dude, not a woman, because usually the classic scene is you have the borderline flapper singer up there.
Yep.
But it was still, it's perfect for the period. Like the song, the sound that we're getting out of this, and it immediately sets the tone of what era we're in, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's perfect. Like that is selling me. And then we also have a pretty strong to decent, you know, traditional composition behind a lot of like the flight pieces are really well supported with the music kind of carrying through kind of the love and beauty of flight, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna hand it off. That's as much as I want.
I also gave it an 8. The period music was just fabulous. I am a big fan of essentially Fallout, which is just that music all the time. And I am definitely one of those people that always keeps the radio on while playing that game. I love those kind of just period musical compositions. And the whole movie, I was just like, oh, this is great. I love this.
Nice.
Keep it going. What
I
about
gave
you?
it a 7, and I'm going to kind of be the opposite of you a little bit in that, like, I thought the 20s music got to be a bit grating after a while. I don't love the period music like you do.
How dare you?
What is wrong with you?
Well, so I knocked it down to a 7 because I felt like the score from Howard Shore was very good, like especially like you're saying, the flight scenes. There was just like the color grading to me, like at the very front, they start, you know, playing like the period piece music, and it set the tone perfect. Everything's great. They carried it a little too far. There were a few scenes where like I felt like there should have been score there, where instead
of,
they went with like ragtime, you know, 20s music.
Yeah.
And then like when they got to the 30s, they just kind of stopped doing that. And then so like the back half of the movie is just the score for the most part. And so it felt weird, just like the color grade, the selective color stuff of like they just stopped at some point.
Well, and I think that's because because really it's more on the content of what's happening in the plot at the time.
Right. Yeah.
Because he's no longer whining and dining with, you know, Hollywood's elites.
Yeah.
He's now, you know, being consumed by his OCD.
Yeah, he stops going out to the place, or at least that we see going out to the places where this music is.
Yeah. Yeah. But for me, I like the score better than the vintage music after a while. Like after the first few tone setters, I was like, got it. I want to hear this scene scored. I want to, you know, I don't want to hear another tone setter, another, you know, like for me, it went on just a little too far as that goes.
That makes sense. That's fair.
All right. What do we think about plot? Andrew, you want to jump back in?
I gave it an 8.
Okay. Go for it.
So it's a biopic.
Yeah.
There's really not, I mean, they have to condense a lot of the dramatic moments in his life into a 3-act film. There's clearly, you know, some timeline kind of movement here to where he didn't really go into like full recluse mode to where he's, you know, peeing in milk bottles until like the late 50s, I think, if that's right. And
I don't know if it hit quite as fast after World War II as they
I looked it up because that was one of my sticking points of, again, not knowing anything about Howard Hughes. I kept pausing and looking stuff up like, did that really happen? When did this happen? It happened like late 50s. So it was like pretty far separated from.
But you need to have some kind of major conflict to have your quotation marks hero come back up and be triumphant at the end.
Yeah, he can't still just kind of be swimming along at that point. You got to have something happen.
Exactly. But for a biopic, it was actually very accurate to his general life outside of a couple of omissions that they had of some domestic abuse with Ava Gardner and a lot of his womanizing
They at
stuff.
least hinted at it with their kind of final confrontation.
Yeah.
And then, she fights back or whatnot. But you just didn't get it. You got some of the other stuff, but yeah.
Yeah. But honestly, like, for them essentially, turning a quotation marks documentary of someone's life into a dramatic retelling of it, it was actually, I thought it was fantastic.
Okay.
And it's definitely one of those pieces that it's not something I'm going to watch very often. I may not watch it again, not because I don't like it. It's just, it's a long film, and going into it, I know exactly everything that happens.
I'm gonna take it down a notch. I gave it a 6.
Okay.
Some of it is it sits well. Okay, one, it is incredibly long, and it feels longer than it is, and that is a ding on it.
That's more entertainment, though. That's not plot.
No. This is plot, because if they had done a better job of breaking it up into distinct eras, and the way it was structured, where he goes through these different eras, one, you could have gotten further into the timeline and put him in the 50s when being the full reclusive makes sense, instead of it being like 1947 or almost an indiscriminate time, because they just don't give you what that passage of time really is.
Yeah.
They don't give you anything to pin to it, which is incredibly frustrating, because for me, I would see events that would happen. I'd be like, okay, I know
when this happened.
I know the XF crashed in 46. I know when that happened. And his recovery from that was a long time.
It was a very long time.
Yeah.
And they didn't give us a good way of covering something like that. Like that was an opportunity to almost montage us, right? To give us the coming back,
the healing montage.
Not a training montage. Kind of like something.
Got the Rocky music going,
but give us like a time lapse or something, of like the changes of the hospital as he's like his position is altering. Because in real life, when he was in that situation, they showed him with the whole orange juice thing, right? Which I don't know how accurate that is, but in real life, when he was there, he completely redesigned the hospital bed to where it could move him.
Yeah.
And heat, cold, deliver water, etc. It's all the things that you see in a modern hospital bed are his design from that accident.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
That was a huge opportunity to build that in for him, and they just didn't do it.
Well, you could have shown that exactly of like he's coming back, but he can't stop engineering. He can't stop.
He has to solve the problem that's immediately before him now, right? Like that was a huge miss, I felt like. Because I mean, you have to include the crash. Like that has to be included.
Well, that's probably the most dramatic thing that's really happened.
It is borderline unbelievable, even though it's actually quite accurate.
To what happened,
represented. So that was also interesting. It was a really awkward at times. It felt like, because sometimes it felt like I was watching a documentary. Like borderline. I'm gonna have Morgan Freeman cuts in with narration over this. And then other times,
Howard, no.
Yeah, and then other times I'm watching like a drama, and it felt like it kind of swung back and forth between those. And it's same kind of thing with like the color grading. Is like you need to figure out which of these two tones you want and run with it, and not like swing me back and forth.
Yeah. Ryan,
I landed right in the middle. I gave it a 7.
Okay.
I feel like, not to rehash a lot of the stuff, but like where I said earlier, where like not giving you a time kind of kept the audience off balance. I think that worked for it on some levels and against it on others. Whereas like I really like to have a time frame when I'm watching a biopic or something like that, because I get genuinely interested in what's happening. And I think the reason they did it is because they're remixing his life to make more dramatic sense for a movie. With the peeing in the jars that happened, in the 50s or whatever. They're restructuring it or whatever, which was fine. I think they did gloss over a lot of the sexual harassment, and a lot of deaths happened on the sets of his movies. They didn't really discuss that.
Yeah, 3 people died on the set of Hell's Angels. In the late 1929, he killed someone with a car.
Yeah.
Then he was also married twice at the beginning of 1920.
Yeah.
Or like early 20s.
Yeah. And I just feel like
over a lot.
This was 2004. They did biopics a little bit different back then. Now they probably would have gotten into some of the darker part of that stuff.
I mean, they at least got into, he has this incredibly creepy and strange audition.
Yeah.
For a high school 15-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, she obviously, comes back and has her, kind of revenge moment where obviously, there something is happening there that has, we're already in a really weird situation to begin with.
Yeah.
And something has happened there to push it to this point. And then, his response to it where he's like trying to calm her is, there is so much going on in that scene that it's just, ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
I love you, Peanut, or whatever
Oh,
he says.
Don't
or
want
puppy or something. I don't even know. It was like, ooh, I don't want to hear that.
I don't like that.
There's a whole stretch there just,
Also, there's like that scene at the front with Josie Moran, who plays the flapper girl or whatever, where he just like turns
the
and
waitress
out of nowhere is like straight macking on this girl, and you're like, wait.
Well, no, you've got this camera shot where you can kind of see over her shoulder and you can't really see his arms, and he's like talking about putting his fingers on her. And
I know. Like, what's
you
he
don't
touching?
know where they are.
Who
Like, what
knows?
are you doing, dude?
Yeah.
I mean, Howard was very creepy.
Right.
I mean, when you got,
In real life, he was
millions
very
in
creepy.
1920s, I guess, they just do whatever you
No,
want.
I mean,
like, ugh.
yeah, you
Who could
definitely
imagine?
do
Yeah.
whatever you want.
The other thing that kind of frustrated me about plot wise was that like they did a lot of scenes where they introduced this problem where it's like, John C. Reilly's like, Howard, we don't have the money. And he's like, well, just figure it out. And he's like, well, if we don't, we're going to lose everything. And then it's like cut to, and then
we
next
figured
scene,
it out.
everything's fine. And again, it's determinate on like, is this 10 years later? Is this 2 years later? Where are we at?
Yeah.
Yeah, a week. And I'm still going like, wait, did we solve that problem? Did that work out?
Is this going to come back and bite us? Am I worried about this?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop on like some of those where it was like, is that settled? And that happened like 4 or 5 times throughout the movie where like there's a problem. He's like, just figure it out. And you're like, oh man, are they? And then they just go on and you're like, oh, I guess they did.
Well, so the
super easy, barely an inconvenience.
Right.
So one of the things, the Inquisition at the end with Congress or the Senate,
Inquisition.
The
Senate hearing.
It's an Inquisition.
Inquisition. Break out the red robe.
Yes.
No one expects the Congress Inquisition.
No one expects the Congress Inquisition.
Okay, so for the Senate hearings, they were like in real life, those were not about the Spruce Goose.
Right.
They basically had to kind of mold it around to make it relevant to the story, to have some
like
kind
his
of
comeback.
Yeah, to have some kind of comeback to be like, oh, he's gotten over his OCD. No, actually hasn't. Joke's on you.
Yeah.
But so I think in real life it was about some kind of it was about like embezzling funds or something like that, if I remember correctly.
I mean, they were kind of hitting on that with the idea that he received all these funds from the government and didn't do anything with them.
But he was never accused of basically like war profiteering,
right?
Essentially.
Yeah. And they also had that really awkward bit where he kind of they have the back and forth, which was I thought pretty good and kind of a highlight. And then like he gets his final word in, and it was like Leo just like mic drops and walks off the stage. He's like, okay. There's
don't get
no
to do that.
way you just mic drop and just walk out in front of senators. Like, don't try that on your own. Like, this is one of those like, don't do this at home, kids.
If you ever find yourself at a congressional inquisition, then make sure that you don't just like mouth off to a senator and walk away.
Unless you're a very eccentric millionaire who has lots of jars of urine that you could use in any number of ways.
Because that's when the red robes get broken out, right? Like, this is when we're going to the hot tub.
Is this turning into Jurassic Park 3 where you can use them as weapons?
I thought we were going for like Team Fortress 2.
or that too. Wow. I haven't thought about that game in years.
Some people still. I was gonna say no one has. I was like, no, there's still a lot of people that do it on a regular basis.
Still playing that game, yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to entertainment. Yep. I gave it a 7.
Okay.
I think that 7 is purely because of the performances and some pretty decent cinematography here and there.
Yeah.
I think I would probably hesitate to watch it again just on a whim, just because it's so long. And it's not my favorite Scorsese film.
Yeah.
But for me, it was extremely enjoyable to see Leo as a young actor, working on his craft, cutting his chops, seeing Cate Blanchett. Like, seeing the acting was great. Some of the cinematography was good, but I think the strongest suit was the acting. That's the most entertainment I got out of it. Everything else, I would probably not watch it again unless it's a decade from now.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. What'd you get?
I gave it a 7 as well.
Okay.
Basically for the exact same reasons. Acting was great. I really love the music. I know you're not a fan of the period pieces, but I love them.
It just overstayed its welcome.
Yeah.
It's not that I didn't enjoy it. It was like, got it.
But mostly just the length of the film and the content of the final act is very hard for me to watch.
Yeah.
Just because you just know what's coming, and it's very hard to you're just watching a train wreck and you just can't look away.
Yeah.
And that's and because Leo is such a fantastic actor.
Yeah.
He sells it so well that you're just this just really makes me uncomfortable.
It's hard to watch. It's again a really good showcase of acting,
Yep.
but it's not like an easy breezy
when he's
movie.
repeating over and over and he has the tick.
Mm.
It's just oh man, this is brutal.
Yeah.
Steven?
I gave it a 5.
Ooh,
I'm coming on the low
Wow.
end. So length is a huge issue, right? and not just runtime, but also it has these incredibly draggy moments and these incredibly sped up moments, and it's almost whiplash, right?
Yeah.
Going back and forth. And then the performances are great, right? But I personally, when I look at some of these movies that are very obvious, like you just kind of look at it and you're like, oh, look at the names that are attached. This is Oscar bait.
Right.
They are making this movie to try and sell not to the public, but to the Academy.
yeah.
And there's something about those types of movies that kind of turn me off a little bit.
Sure.
And then we're touching on a lot of history that I'm at least decently familiar with. So it's going to destroy me on disbelief whenever there's just what are you doing?
Right.
And then when they have really good parts, it's like, oh, that's great. But then it's just the whiplash effect. Of,
yeah.
Mhm.
Going back and forth.
Like watching the Hughes racer and just being like, this is really cool. And it's just like, and now we're back in the cockpit.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We're outside. And now we're back in the cockpit. Come on, just get me somewhere else.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. It's just it's just a little too much. I don't know if it's the kind of movie that I would probably ever watch again.
Yeah.
And some of it is the train wreck, like the problems that that are coming, and it's essentially you are witnessing undiagnosed and untreated mental illness. And again, Leo does such a good job with it that it's really hard to watch. When he goes into the repetitions, and even when he has the moments like when Cate Blanchett wants to have they're fighting,
Mm-hmm.
and he breaks away because he can't do the confrontation.
Yeah.
And he's almost searching the room for some other distraction. It is so hard to watch that kind of thing of what looks like a person who is just struggling
Mhm.
inside
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
And that's really hard for me to watch. So I don't mean to just down on it. It's just, for me personally, it's just not something that I could just be like, I'm gonna put the Aviator on again. No.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not really a background.
Yeah,
Movie.
it's not a movie that's just on in the background. It's not something where you're like, it's just Friday night. I got time to kill. Let's Aviator's
throw
right.
on the
Aviator's
Aviator.
on stream. That's easy. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for listening to Spoilers Intended. Remember, if you like what you heard and want more, you can check us out at spoilersintendedpodcast.com. From there, you can support us on Patreon for just as little as $1. You can be part of our Discord server and join in on the conversation. You can check us out on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, all that good stuff. Till next time, I'm Ryan.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Steven.
And as always, every spoiler was intended.